Hi and welcome back to maths class. So today we're going to look at fractions and we're going to look at adding fractions. But before I do that, I'm going to do a quick bit of revision of how we understand fractions. Please be patient with the fact that I'm going to go back to the easy stuff, because then what I'm going to do is I'm going to build on that easy stuff when I try to get you to understand not just how to do adding fractions, but to understand how and why it works. So watch the whole thing. Don't just skip over the stuff you think is too easy. Okay, so the first question I want to ask you is, how do I know what fraction of something I've got? If someone shows you a fraction of something, how would you describe it? There's two bits of information I need to know. I need to know how big the pieces are, and I need to know how many I've got. For example, here's a bar of chocolate. Not really, I wish it was. Here's a bar of chocolate that I've cut into 10 pieces, and these green ones are going to me. So how much of the chocolate bar do I have? Well, how big are the pieces? They're tenths. And how many do I have? 1, 2, 3. So I have 3 tenths. So what has this got to do with adding fractions? Well, the thing that makes adding fractions hard is that sometimes we have to add fractions where the pieces are different sizes. I'll show you an example, and guess what? I've got some Nutella toast again. It's a little bit burnt. Here's a piece of toast that I've cut in half. This half has Nutella and this half doesn't. So I want to eat only the Nutella bits. I'm going to eat half a piece of toast. It's 1/2 because I've got one piece, and it's over 2 because I've cut it into 2, which means they're halves. Here's another example. This time I've cut my toast into thirds, and you can clearly see that when I join those 3 together again, they make thirds. 1, 2, 3. Oops, there, definitely thirds. So what's going to happen if I'm going to eat the Nutella toast from one piece and the Nutella toast from the other piece? How much of a piece of toast have I eaten altogether? And how can I work it out? Remember that in order to work out how much I've got, I need to know how big the pieces are and how many I've got. Well, I've got 2 pieces, but they're different sizes. So that's why we have a trick that we do in maths where we're trying to add our fractions together and we want to make all the pieces the same size. And the way I'm going to do that is this. If I take my original piece of toast that I cut into halves and I cut every piece into thirds, and I'm going for thirds because I know the other piece is in thirds, I'm going to end up with sixths. 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4, 5, 6/6. But I don't need that bit. So I've got 3/6, which is the same as a half. We know that. Okay, what about this bit? If I take my original whole bit of toast and I now cut every piece in half, in half, in half, in half, once again, I've got sixths. Now I want to point out what happens when I do that, okay? I started with thirds, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I cut every piece in half. So I've now got twice as many pieces altogether. Instead of 3 pieces altogether, I've got 6. And I've got twice as many pieces with Nutella. I started with 1 Nutella piece. Now I've got 2 Nutella pieces. So instead of 1/3, I've now got 2/6, 2/6. When I put those all together, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5/6. So by cutting up my toast into all the same size piece, I've managed to change 1/2 plus 1/3 into 3/6 plus 2/6. So now I can answer my 2 questions. How many pieces do I have? I've got 5. And how big are they? They're all sixths. So they're all the same size. So I've got 5/6. So let's look at how that looks when I do it with a pen and paper. I've got 1/2 plus 1/3 written there, and I need to change the half size pieces and the third size pieces into all the same size. So what I need to find is the lowest common denominator. You may have seen this before. We call it the LCD, lowest common denominator. Let's look at those words. The denominator is the number on the bottom of my fraction. Common means it's going to be, I can make the denominator for this fraction and this fraction. It's common. I can do it for both. And the lowest is the smallest number that exists, because I can do it. I could have kept cutting that toast into 12ths. I could have cut it into 24ths, but I don't need to keep cutting. So once I've found the smallest number that I can make halves into, I made my halves into sixths, I made my thirds into sixths, then I found the lowest one that I want. And the way we do it is we look for the lowest common multiple of the denominator. The LCM, the lowest common multiple of the denominator. So my multiples of 2 are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I could keep going. My multiples of 3 are 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. Okay, I've found some numbers that are in common. I've got a 6 here and a 6 here. So my lowest common multiple is 6. Now the next question is, how do I get from 2 to 6 by multiplying? I've got to multiply the 2 by 3, and I've got to multiply the 3 by 2 in order to get to the 6. So let's just look at my denominators. I've got 2 times 3 there. If I've changed my denominator by 3, then I've also got to change my numerator by 3. So let's look at the toast. When I had this half and I cut it into 3 pieces, instead of having 2 pieces of toast, I had 6, and the Nutella pieces, instead of being 1, I had 3. So both of those pieces were increased by a factor of 3, were multiplied by 3. So that's why I have to go 1 times 3 here and 2 times 3 here. Same goes for my thirds. If I have to double it to get 6 on the denominator, then I'm going to double my numerator as well. And I have to double that because with my toast, what I originally did was I took this 1/3 and I cut it in half. So when I did that, I changed my thirds to sixths. So there were 6 pieces instead of 3 for the whole bit of toast, but also my Nutella bit got doubled as well. So when I cut things in half, I double the number of pieces. So the number of pieces on both the numerator and the denominator needs to double. That gives me 3 over 6 plus 2 over 6. When I add it together, I get 5/6, which is what I did with my toast. Okay, but we're not always dealing with toast, are we? So now what we're going to do is move away from looking at bits of toast and actual things we can touch and cut up and eat, and just what does it look like when I've just got numbers. So let's do another example. I'm going to add together 3/5 plus 1/4. All right. So the first thing I need to find is my lowest common denominator between 5 and 4. Now you guys may have learned a shortcut, which is I can just go 5 times 4. And I know that if I asked you to find the lowest common multiple of 5 and 4, the first thing you would check is there anything in common between the 5 and the 4? The 4 is made up of 1, 2, and 4 factors. The 5 is just made up of 1 and 5. The only thing they have in common is the 1, which doesn't help us. So to find the lowest common multiple of 5 and 4, I'm just going to go 5 times 4. All right, which means I'm going to have 20 on the bottom. So to get 20 here, I had to multiply by 4. That means on my numerator, I'm also going to multiply by 4. To get 20 in my second fraction, I have to multiply by 5. That means in the numerator, I'm also going to multiply by 5. So now, 3 times 4 is going to give me 12 over 20. 1 times 5 is going to give me 5 over 20. I add it together, I get 17 over 20. And now we're going to do a trickier example where my denominators are going to have a common factor. Let's do 5/12 plus 4/15. 5 over 12 plus 4 over 15. Okay, this example is tricky. How am I going to find the lowest common multiple of 12 and 15? I don't want to do 12 times 15, and I don't have to because I know that there is a common factor between the 12 and the 15. So we're going to do a little revision on how we find the lowest common multiple of 12 and 15. What I look for is a common factor. So 12, what are the factors of 12? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. 12 has a lot of factors. For 15, my factors are 1, 3, 5, and 15. Now let's just double check these. To get 12, I've got 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. To get 15, I've got 1 times 15 or 3 times 5. So now, do I have something in common? Well, the 1 is in common, the 3 is in common, and that's all. So 3 is the highest common factor. Now, probably you don't need to do all that writing. You can look at 12 and 15 and go, 3 goes into both of them. You don't need to write all this down, but this is what I'm thinking when I do these questions. I'm looking first for the highest common factor. So then, to get 12, I need 3 times 4. And this 3 I'm using as my common factor. To get 15, I need the 3 times what? Times the 5. So to get my lowest common multiple, I'm going to need the 12, which is the 3 times 4, and then I multiply it by just the 5. Because now I've got a factor of 12 in here, 3 times 4, and I've also got a factor of 15 when I go 3 times 5. So what do I get here? Well, the easiest way to do this in my head is to pair my friendly numbers. I know that 4 times 5 gives me 20. I can multiply 20. It's just as easy as multiplying 2. So 20 times 3 is going to give me 60. So I've found my lowest common multiple, which is going to be my lowest common denominator. It's going to be 60. What did I multiply the 12 by to get 60? There's my 12. I multiplied it by 5. So 12 times 5 will get me 60. That means I have to do 5 times 5 on the numerator. What did I multiply the 15 by to get 60? 3 times 5 here gives me the 15. So I multiplied it by 4 to get 60. Times 4. And that means I have to do the same on the numerator. I think I'm ready to do this now. 5 times 5 gives me 25. 12 times 5 I already know gives me 60. 4 times 4 gives, oops, that should be a plus. 4 times 4 gives me 16 over 15 times 4, which is 60. So now I'm adding 25 plus 16. Let's just quickly do it down here. 25 plus 16. 6 plus 5 gives me 11. 2 plus 1 gives me 3, plus 1 gives me 4. 41 over 60. Whew. I'm done. Now that seems like a lot of work, but the more of these you do, the easier they'll get as you get better practice with them.